broadcast our conversations on a particular night and kind of get people out there in the mood and understanding what Chris stands for, what we can envision in our future in terms of getting him elected so that he can help our district out, in particular, Florida, in a more general fashion, and the country all the way. So tonight, Chris Wright, we have him, and he's picked a topic that is right up his alley as an attorney.
Yeah.
So we've all seen the videos. We've all seen the people out there that have kind of had their rights trampled on. They've kind of had their ability to go about their daily lives as the American freedom has been so accustomed to doing without having anybody to be able to answer to them. And so we wanted to kind of delve into that. Some of the things that we saw, some of the things that we wish we would have done differently, and some of the things that we can do better, if when the second wave or whatever's coming in the future, so that we can have that. So as a way to prompt Chris, we're going to talk about some of the scenarios that people have seen in the news. One of the ones that made the biggest headlines was the Shelley Luther.
Oh yeah.
Everyone's familiar with that name now. She's going to be the future Joe the plumber. I think we'll see. We'll see Shelley at the next inaugural address.
Probably.
Up there doing her thing because she stood up for freedom. She stood up for people who are tired of being told they can't provide for their families. And so walk us through that case a little bit. I know you kept track of that, especially since you're attorney and you've been to the courts to see how that judge was handled things.
Yeah. So just to start off, the inspiration for this topic is I was listening to 105.9, which is a local radio station. Every day around noon, they switch shifts. And one of the things that they do during that shift change is they play a patriotic song. And the patriotic song that was playing was "I'm Proud to Be an American," Lee Greenwood. Everybody knows that. I think if you went out and you talked to people, you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who hasn't heard that song. But when's the last time you listened to the lyrics? Right? So the lyrics for that song, it starts out, if tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife. I thank my lucky stars to be living here today because the flag still stands for freedom and they can't take that away. And I listened to those lyrics and I thought, what's been going on lately has really turned that song into an American irony, because there are a ton of people who are finding themselves in the position where they're having to restart their lives because the government did take it away. The government told the entire population that they could not go to work, that they had to stay home. And especially with Shelley Luther, which is making national news right now, mostly because she's probably the one that had the screws put to her the hardest than any other story that I've heard. But she's a salon owner in Texas and got to the breaking point where she said, listen, if we don't open, we're going under and I can't feed my kids. So she opened her salon. She started taking customers. She was being safe, masks, sanitizer, the whole bit. But the city came down hard on her. The city of Houston came down hard on her and issued her a cease and desist order, followed by a fine, and then ultimately followed by jail time through a contempt order from a local county judge. Now, the reason this has made national news is because it took an act of the governor to try to get that straightened out. They got national news because they've got congressmen. Actually, I even think the lieutenant governor offered to take her spot in jail so that she could be out and earning a living for her kids. And, I'm listening to these news reports, shaking my head going, what is going on? Why are we finding ourselves in a position where government all of a sudden is dictating how we live our lives and on such a daily basis? They've always been there with regulation, with rules, with laws that, help us coexist, but tell us whether or not we can earn a living.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found rather intrusive, I guess is a good word for that in that case, is when the judge, specifically in the video that they have him on, they're like, if you will just apologize, if you will just say, I'm sorry, for that, if you'll just kiss the ring and acknowledge your overseers. Yeah. And I was like, is this a common thing that occurs in courtrooms?
No, and it bordered on tragedy. it bordered on tragedy. It was probably the worst comedy you could ever watch, to have a judge, a county elected official, take his position and say, my position of authority is more important than your ability to put food on the table.
Yeah.
You know, come here and bow down. Just say you're sorry. Acknowledge that government has the power to tell you how you can and cannot earn a living, and we'll let you go on your merry way.
Yeah.
And I mean, for anybody who was really paying attention to that clip, it was just a giant slap in the face. And some people are like, well, that's in Texas. That won't happen here. Well, if you're not careful.
But it has been happening in other places. I mean, the governors have taken on themselves to put powerful edicts in place. I mean, we were listening to a story at the governor of Maine, Mills, canceled everything, including churches.
Yep. Locking
churches.
Yep.
As part of the everyone be safe.
Yeah. You know, the interesting part about those, as you read these articles, every one of these articles has featured people who are trying to retain some semblance of normalcy, but they're also taking steps to make sure that they're being safe. Like, for instance, Shelley Luther, using hand sanitizer, using masks, trying to be safe in that regard.
Right.
The issue with, I think was it Missouri or Kansas that they were doing the church thing? Everybody was trying to congregate in a parking lot. People were staying in their cars so that they could watch this sermon. And the police started ticketing people. Right? So, and it's not even like people are just saying, you know what, forget you, government. I don't care. I'm just going to go out and do what I want anyway. That's not what's been happening. People have been trying to practice safe standards when they're getting around one another, and they're still being stomped on. And it's tragic. It's absolutely tragic.
Yeah. And all the while you see these video clips that surface where the leaders themselves are not following their own advice.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that Tucker Carlson report the other day.
Yeah. You got Obama golfing, and then 2 days later, Michelle Obama saying, stay inside, don't go outside unless it's absolutely essential.
Yeah. It's the fundamental double standard.
I like golf. I don't mind that he's golfing. I mind that they told everyone else to stay inside while he golfs.
Yeah. Well, clearly Obama didn't think that it was a risk to go out onto the golf course and spend his time golfing.
It's them telling other people.
Right. It's the double standard.
Yeah.
It's don't tell me that I can't go out and do it, and then you turn around and do it and say, oh, well, I'm more essential.
Yeah. And it gets along to the lines of that tyranny. You know, that's the initial pieces of it. That's where someone feels, hey, I'm being told to do something, and those other people don't have to do that. That's exactly where that feeling comes from when the tea starts getting taxed.
Right. and so where does that problem stem from? It's where you got the few at the top who kind of get full of themselves a little bit, think that they're going to put out one standard for themselves, and they're going to put out a different standard for everybody else. Yeah. And then that's where you start to see people questioning what's going on because they recognize the hypocrisy.
So what is some of the history of this? Where I know in history they have issued quarantines before.
Oh yeah.
And they've got some legitimacy behind putting a lockdown on the people. Mm-hmm. What time frame? 30 days, 100 days. What have you seen out there?
Funny you bring that up because there actually is no standard. So governors, the executive branch, whether it be on the federal level or on the local level, have always enjoyed a certain level of discretion when responding to the needs of the state, especially when you're talking about times of crisis, right? But there hasn't been any delineation, at least not that I've seen, where either a court or even a legislature has said, yeah, we're going to draw a bright line right here. You're not allowed to cross it. And based on what's been going on, I think we're kind of at that point where maybe we need to start drawing some bright lines so we don't find ourselves in this exact same situation at some point in the future. And I wanted to spend some time tonight talking about lessons that we can take from this experience and apply to our government moving forward so that we don't find ourselves in the same situation, right? So what are some of the lessons? What's the proper role of government, and what are some of the lessons that we can take from this so we don't experience the same thing in the future? Yeah,
so some of the limitations.
Right.
A large part of a Republican ticket is small and limited government.
Absolutely. But what does that really boil down to when you talk about small government? You're talking about choices, right? You're talking about choices. Who gets to make the choice? Does government get to make the choice and then come down here and tell me what's going to happen? Or do I get to choose? Do I get to choose? So anytime you're talking about a small government platform, what is the proper role of a government during a time of crisis? And the proper role of government is to be an information source, a resource point. This is what's going on. These are the studies that we've been doing. Here's what the virus is affecting in local populations and where. This is where we think that we can get away and take steps to continue to be safe. And then you give that information to people and you entrust them to be able to act responsibly.
Yes.
You know, we don't need it's often referred to as a nanny state. We don't need a nanny state telling us how we are and are not going to live on a daily basis. We're perfectly capable as reasonable, responsible adults to make that determination for ourselves.
And so the funny you bring up that nanny state. So that's been something we've heard for a long while.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it started with sodas and how large of a soda you could have, and we laughed at that.
Yeah.
It started, and then it became, you know, for Christmas I got all kinds of metal straws.
Right.
Everybody was giving me a metal straw. Like I got straws. Straws work. Straws have been around forever. I get the environmental aspect of that,
Mm-hmm.
but what are we doing here? I mean,
right.
And so all of a sudden this gave everybody that already wanted to be
Mm-hmm.
a mini dictator,
Yeah.
the complete authority to be able to then expand everything that they wanted to accomplish.
Well, you know how you cook a frog, right? You don't drop a frog into boiling water because he's just going to jump out.
Yeah.
You put a frog into cold water and you raise the temperature ever so slowly until by the time the frog realizes what's going on, he's already cooked. So every time you see one of these overreaches, starting with the straws, you know, and then, oh, well, you can't use plastic cups. It's got to be biodegradable paper cups. You can't order a soda that's more than 12 ounces or we're going to tax you an additional 10 cents on the soda to take care of the environmental, you know, all that stuff. Those are tiny little incremental increases in temperature until one day you wake up and you realize you've been cooked.
Yeah. And it's not a problem that the straw concept is bad. It's, if you got a better concept, sell it to me.
Right.
Make me want to buy a metal straw.
Right. But the point,
hey,
though, is that method puts the choice.
Yeah,
exactly. That method puts the choice on me, though.
Yeah.
Right. It engages me as a consumer and as a citizen to make a responsible choice, not only for myself, but for the environment. And if I choose to do that, hey, that's wonderful.
All right. So now meld that concept with responsibility is not occurring. Right. So they're like, the masses are still out there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still complaining today that the masses are like, hey, we're exiting. We're in the middle of May. This was 30 days of April. Now we're in the middle of May. We're done. We're leaving. And the media is still hammering down that you shouldn't be out. You shouldn't be out.
So I think the issue there is when you start something this big, something like a pandemic, the immediate knee-jerk reaction is exactly what we did. We hit the brakes and we brought everything to a grinding halt. Well, the problem is people are willing to accept that to a certain point, right? They're willing to accept that while you're out there saying, hey, you know, this thing is killing people. We're talking about tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people. We're talking about hospitals overflowing, people being in the streets. And so everybody's like, oh, okay, you know, maybe this is what we need to do to look out for the general welfare. But as that data starts coming in, and as people are starting to realize that, you know, it's really not as bad as they had initially predicted it was supposed to be. And we're actually doing a pretty decent job coping with this as it is, but they're still expecting us to exist under the same strict, you know, restrictions that they initially imposed. Right. So I keep hearing this, well, let's follow the data. Let's follow the science. Well, if the data and the science are saying this isn't as bad as everybody's making it out to be, or at least the media is making it out to be, maybe we need to reevaluate where we stand. And that's where we start coming into this. Okay, how far do we want to let government tell us we can and cannot go when it comes to things as essential as earning a living, putting food on the table?
I saw a Facebook post of a good friend of mine who technically is a scientist. Mm-hmm. That's what he does. He runs science projects on lower mammals and to verify various things. And he said, hey, he had an article on there, $600 million has been spent on field hospitals that didn't see a single patient.
Right.
And someone put in the byline, good thing, question mark.
Right.
And it's like, well, I guess it's depending on who you are and where you're at. You know, I guess it is that we didn't have as many patients. Some people are going to say, well, that's because we locked down so well that we were able to actually flatten the curve really good.
So I got to spend a little bit of time up at the Florida State Emergency Operations Center during Hurricane Dorian. And one of the things that I learned while I was up there watching all of these state agencies do what they do best is when you're putting into place resources, huge resources like temporary base camps, and we're moving trucks and pallets of food and furniture or whatever else needs to be moved, you sign those contracts days before you need them, right? And then once you sign the contract, the money's out the door. Now, there's usually a provision in those contracts that allow you to roll some of that back if it turns out you don't need as much. So it kind of like stages it up and tiers it so that you're not blowing $600 million in one shot. But once contracts are signed, money starts going out the door. And then you can't take a need like that, like, hey, we need generators and bulldozers and whatever other heavy equipment, and be like, well, let's wait till the hurricane hits and then see if we actually need it.
Yeah.
You got to have that stuff pre-staged. So, I'm not knocking government. I'm not knocking the governor for spending that kind of money on field hospitals when all of the initial projections were saying we're going to need this stuff.
Yes.
Right. But, where I start taking issue, though, is that now we've seen a month worth of data. Now that we've seen that things are not nearly as bad as what the models were initially projecting, why are we still in lockdown?
Yeah.
And I understand states are starting to open up again, but I haven't seen anything coming across the news or the media or even public officials coming out explaining to me why we can't just reopen.
Yeah, except for, New York, New Jersey, hot spots.
Right.
I'm very interested in watching the next iteration of the Shelley Luther, but in California.
Oh, yeah.
And with a massive company like Tesla.
Oh,
Mr.
yeah.
Elon Musk taking directly on Mr. That is going to be one of the great fights.
Yeah.
I'm very much looking forward. That's just kind of happening right now.
Yeah. So I bet there are politicians all across the country that are calling up Elon Musk right now. Like, hey, man, why aren't you coming to my state? Florida is ripe for technology. Ohio's already got car plants that are going unused. Like, if California is gonna put you through the ringer like that, bring those jobs here. We got people who are ready, willing, and able to take those good, high-paying middle-class jobs and live right here in our state. So, listen, if California wants to walk all over their business owners, please, you have a home in Florida.
Indeed. I don't know if it's going to be a lawsuit. He said, if you're going to arrest anybody when I open my plant, come arrest me. I'll be right there.
Yeah.
And, essentially throwing down the gauntlet.
Yeah.
Be like, we're done with this. And it's going to take some business leaders to do that, to get on board that has some muscle. So it's not just
I appreciate that he's taking that standpoint, because Elon's one of the few guys in the country that could afford the lawyers to be able to take on that kind of establishment. Shelley Luther, poor lady in Texas. She's a salon owner that's about to go under. Thank goodness that she had some level-headed public servants come and help her out, because how is she going to pay $7,000 worth of a fine? How is she going to pay an attorney to take her case to court without bankrupting her? So that, I'm glad that it worked out for her, but there are plenty of stories like this all over the country that aren't being reported, and it's a crime. It's a shame.
It really is. And you're starting to see some evidence of it in our grocery store. So, for example, we know that beef production has been shut down, or should I say, discouraged.
Bottlenecked.
I don't know. They haven't quite gone down there and locked it up themselves.
Yeah.
But they've made it very, very much not wanting to. And we're going to see that. I've seen shelves have gone into the wrong time at a Costco or a various entity and been like, man, this feels very much like Venezuela or Russia during the time.
Which actually leads me into one of my points about lessons that we need to take from this. Probably the most glaring lesson that we need to take from this is that when things really start getting crazy, government's not going to be able to help you.
Yeah.
They just don't have the resources. They don't have the ability to care for every single family in the country. Now, who knew that toilet paper was going to be in demand like it was for those 2 months? What in the world does that have to do with fighting coronavirus? I don't know. But when you have the President of the United States getting on national news promising people that the supply lines for toilet paper are not being shelved, if you'll excuse the pun, that kind of says something, right? The leader of the free world has to come out and reassure his people that there's an ample supply of toilet paper. Stop hoarding it.
Yeah.
Right now, fortunately, since this episode that we're going through has been relatively minor, much more so than it could have been. Think of what it would really be if we had true shortages of food. Like if you went to the store and there's literally no produce on the shelf. There's no meat. There's no vegetables. Canned goods are in short. So could you imagine? Like people will lose their mind, right? And so, why is that? Because they're not ready for a prolonged lockdown. They're just not. Now in Florida, we handle this a little better than most, I will admit, just because we're used to hurricane season, right? We understand that when hurricane season rolls around, there's a very real possibility that you might be without power and access to a grocery store for 3 to 5 days. But it's always been short term. You're always talking about 5 days, a week, a week and a half, and then the supply lines start rolling in and things go back to quasi-normal depending on how bad you get hit. But access to essentials has always been there.
Yeah.
Then never before have, at least not in my lifetime, and probably not in my parents' lifetime either, have you seen true food shortages. Like, here's your ration card. Go get your 1 scoop of rice this week, right? And if it really gets to that point, I mean, it's mass chaos.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever get to that kind of ration point without a lot more happening before that.
Well, and I'm not wishing that on anybody, but the underlying point is that we as citizens need to take this preparedness piece and really take it to heart. It's one thing to have your 3 to 5 days of rations ready for hurricane. It's another one to be prepared for 2 to 3 months of not having access to essentials like toilet paper. Yeah. I mean, who saw that coming, right? So
going forward, there's some proposals that are being kicked around Congress already in terms of limiting you don't want to limit governors' powers all the time, but there's got to be something put in place to check where their limit ends.
Yeah, one of the ideas that I was kicking around, and this is by no means like a final product for legislation, but one of the ideas I was kicking around is you give governors 30 days. Like, listen, if you're telling me that this is so bad that you need to tell everybody to stay home, we're going to give you 30 days. And if you're going to keep me closed past 30 days, it constitutes a taking under the 5th Amendment, and you're now required to make sure that my business does not fail. You have to compensate me for that taking. Just like if government swoops in and tries to take your property to build a park or some other kind of public accommodation, they have to pay you for it.
And that's a 5th Amendment.
That's a 5th Amendment clause, right? So, right. So it could be an act of the legislature to say, listen, if we're going to keep you closed longer than 30 days, it constitutes a taking, and you're entitled to compensation. Now, what's that going to force government to do? It's going to force them to do one of two things. Either justify to the people why keeping me closed is so essential to public health that it's worth taking money out of the treasury to keep me afloat, or it's going to force government to say, I can't justify the expense. I'm going to let business owners make the choice on whether or not they're going to open. Yeah. And that choice is going to be based on information that ultimately comes from the government. But so the point there is you give the governor the latitude to be able to respond immediately to threats, but you also put a backdrop on it that says at some point, you're going to have to come out here and tell me why you're keeping me closed. And if you're going to keep me closed, you would better have a really good reason for taking money out of the public treasury to keep me open. It's not fair for any governor to come down and stomp on a small business owner because they can and trying to justify it without having to put their money where their mouth is. Yeah, actually, I guess technically put our money where his mouth is.
And that was the point I heard as well. Like the government to come to the rescue to put out all this PPE money.
Right.
It's a dollar for dollar. It's they're going to run out of the money because it's our money.
Right.
It's got to go back into it.
Right.
They're not just. They're going to print some, but it's coming from taxpayers.
Right. So the idea is to create a decision point that requires the governor to come down and say, all right, can I sell the people that this is such a huge emergency that it warrants taking money out of the treasury to keep people afloat? Or do I trust that business owners will act responsibly and that the people will act responsibly and that they will patronize these establishments in a way that will not unduly risk public health, right? And I think if we had taken more steps like that earlier, we'd be hearing less stories like what's going on with Shelley Luther.
Yeah, and the government would have to have some kind of way to give it back to them.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're if they're going to shut it down, they give them the money, and then what date they're going to open it back up.
Right.
So a lot of this has been, we haven't had one of these events in 100 years.
Yeah.
That's gotten so where we're not sure exactly where the death toll could be. And I admit when it first started making the rounds, the numbers being thrown out there from the Spanish flu were 100 million.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, if this, I was hoping our system of health would be much more able to handle it, and it seems that it has.
Yeah.
We've come a long way in 100 years, but you start throwing a number of 100 million out there. One of the other things I not to take this internationally out of your scope, but one of the things that I have not had anything on is news on outside the rest of the world.
Oh yeah.
So I'm looking for information for Indonesia, and India, and some of these other countries where social distancing is almost an impossibility.
Yeah, well, China would probably be your prime example of whether or not social distancing works, because those guys are shoulder to shoulder. Fortunately, China has probably been the worst bad actor you could have ever asked for when you're talking about the origin of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Right? They're actively covering up reliable information sources, fudging numbers to try to make themselves look better, and you can't rely on anything they've got to say. And the problem is ground zero is in China, right? If you're gonna conduct those studies, that would be where you'd want to conduct them when this thing was really start raging on. So I don't know that we're going to get anything solid out of China in the foreseeable future. I'm certainly not counting on it.
Yeah, I know that there's been active investigations. I know that there is a lot more finger pointing at the laboratory right now.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, what's finger pointing get you, right? Okay, it's nice that China, we've established that China may have been negligent in this thing leaking out, but where's the so what? What's the so what? What are we going to do about it, right? China's a sovereign nation. What do we have that we can hold over China to try to force them to change their conduct? Because that's really what it's about, right? Is influencing conduct and how other nations deal with us. I'll give you a prime example why this is so dangerous. When we started calling China out on all the shenanigans that were going on over there, they threatened to cut off our supply lines for things like pharmaceuticals, right? So one of the lessons I think we need to take from this is diversity. All right, we're never going to be able to turn off our economic commingling with China. They're too big. We're too big. We've got too much invested in each other's economy. But what we can do is diversify, so that China is not the only source of these essential materials coming into the country, so that they don't have the leverage of being like, hey, you guys better shut up over there, or we're going to cut off your drugs, right? That's if you want to talk about a national security threat, that's a national security threat. You're talking about cutting off my supply to essential medication because we're not falling in line with your rhetoric.
Right.
Come on now.
Yeah.
Right. That's a lesson that needs to be taken from this event. We've got to diversify our supply lines so that we do not become dependent on any one country for essentials like pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, and I got to say that Trump was on that from the very get-go.
Yeah.
I mean, even before the pandemic became, the pandemic, it was
get manufacturing back in the country.
Yeah, great again. It was build jobs here. Don't let the factories close. Incentivize here. Put tariffs on Mexico to keep jobs flowing south.
Yeah, and I think with the revelation that we've gotten about the kind of leverage that another country can have over us based on that supply line, we need to redouble our efforts on that front. We've got to get some of that stuff back into the country. I'm not saying that these big Fortune 500 companies got to pack up their international plants and move them back to the country. It would be an overstep to try to force them to do that anyway. Yeah. But certainly we can incentivize that behavior.
I think the people will be incentivizing that behavior through purchasing. I've seen great movements for identifying goods and such.
Yeah, the purchasing power of the people is enormous. Yeah. And if the people are motivated enough, we can move mountains.
Yeah. So I want to bring it back home now. I want to bring it into something that is more in our direct way. When the police line up in front of a Capitol building, on several different places, you see these where the protesters are. They're tamping down protests. I don't know if they think these protesters are going to they do go into the Capitol building. Some of them were armed citizens. I don't necessarily think that I would take a gun into a Capitol building. I don't know what the point of that is when they're protesting just being out there free and the right to assemble. But I don't like the fact that good citizens, cops who we trust, who we believe in, seem to act exactly as the Venezuelan police act. I'm going to do what's best for my family because I'm getting a paycheck and food for my family and provide for them. So I'm going to stand in front of my fellow citizens.
So I think cops kind of get a bad rap in that way because you always see the few examples that get blown up, and then all of a sudden every cop is associated with, this behavior that's obviously unacceptable. I think by far and large, our law enforcement professionals are exactly that. They're good professional people that are just trying to do their jobs.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, at the end of the day, a lot of these guys, they just take their cues from the sheriff. It's kind of like the military. You got your privates and your guys who have just been indoctrinated in the military, and sergeant says, go there, do this. And it's, yes, sir, here I go. Right. They don't, what's the saying? Ours is not to reason why.
Yeah.
So I think
Alfred Lloyd Tennyson.
Right. I think there's a fair amount of that goes in with your rank and file officers. They're just out there trying to do their job, and they're taking their cues from the supervisors. I think one of the ways that we can address that issue is education. So to get a law enforcement license in the state of Florida, you have to go through a truncated course. I think it's like 10 or 12 weeks or something. It's not terribly long. They do take a class on criminal law and criminal procedure, but it's not nearly the kind of level that, like, say, an attorney gets. So I spent a whole year studying criminal law and criminal procedure. So obviously I understand the subject a lot better than they do, but the way they push down these ideas, you're expected to have this base level of knowledge and then go out on the street and figure it out. And if you can't figure it out, you call your sergeant, who may or may not have seen this before, and he just does what he did before. And then the prevalent mentality is, well, we'll just let the lawyers figure it out. Well, okay, maybe the lawyers can figure it out, but that's not before the people who get caught up in the system have to shell out tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and may or may not have their employment and lives destroyed because they end up spending a few nights in jail. There's the stigma of being in the situation in the first place, even if you end up getting acquitted. So, when you start equating that issue to then what you see, say, on like the steps of a Capitol building, these guys are just out there doing their job. What's going through their mind is not, I wonder if this is constitutional or not. Maybe I shouldn't, there's like, my sergeant told me to stand out here with my baton and my riot shield, and that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
So that discussion really needs to be had on a higher level than the guys you see standing out in front of the Capitol building.
Yeah.
As far as people storming the Capitol building with weapons and stuff, I mean,
I think the cops have used restraint in terms of just chill.
Well, yeah. I mean, certainly the argument that danger could exist, that it could escalate, is always there. I mean, it's always there. But I'm glad to see that has not happened. And I'm glad to see that the folks who have been exercising their lawful rights out front of these Capitol buildings have been acting responsibly, despite what maybe some of the guys on the left might be pushing out, like they're here to terrorize senators and legislators. Well, but if legislators and senators really had an issue with that, it would be illegal, right? They're not doing anything illegal. They're coming out, they're exercising their constitutional rights. And I'm sorry if that makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is they're not doing anything wrong.
Right.
Right.
They're screaming for their freedom. They're screaming, we're not going to let it go down. And imagine if nobody checked up any of them. If there was no dissent over this whatsoever, they'd be like, oh, well, if they're willing to accept that far.
Yeah, somebody has to stand up and say something.
Next step? Yeah.
Right? Because like we said with the frog, you just let them keep ticking up the temperature until you wake up one day and you realize you're cooked.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think this has been an incredibly good discussion. We've hit almost our time frame, what we want to. We want to kind of open up the floor here. If anybody's got questions out there for candidate Chris Wright, certainly you've got the chat box down there to be able to submit your question to us. We'd be glad to have him take them. We're looking to do this almost on a weekly basis. We're going to see if our schedule permits this, to pick up a topic. We want people out there to see our candidate, to see Chris Wright, to listen to him, to be able to get a flavor for what his skill set is and what he's going to be able to bring to our district in Congress.
Yeah.
We want you guys definitely to advertise for us. So the many that are here, everybody brings 5 more next week, and everybody brings 5 more.
Yeah, jump on your social media page. Let people know how it went. If you enjoyed the discussion, if you thought we could make some tweaks here or there to make it a little more interesting or entertaining for you, we certainly welcome the constructive criticism. By all means, point people to the website. It made it real easy to remember. It's a ridiculously long URL. It's ChristopherWrightForCongress.com. So it's easy to remember, but you got to type in all those letters. We'll try to do better for re-election. We'll come up with a better URL. But really, the big thing is just get an opportunity to let people listen to me. Give them an opportunity to see and start to compare and contrast the difference between myself and the other guys that are running. I'm the only lawyer that's on the stage, and if you're looking to send a guy into a room full of lawyers in Washington D.C., who you want to send? You want to send your lawyer. So, that's a message that we need to get out to people and let them know that when you're talking about a skill set that can back up, the things that people are talking about, I'm the only one on the stage that's got the skill set to back it up. Now, do you have to be a lawyer to be a congressman? Of course not. But you'll spend your entire first term just trying to catch up and understand the law before you actually get in and start making policy. And that's not what we need. We need somebody who can jump right in and start getting into it, especially with everything that's going on right now. And so I hope that folks will start to see that not only do I have the ability to articulate my point and speak to people, but I also have the skill set to back it up.
All right, we have a question here from Missy. What do you suggest for the law-abiding citizen to fight against these restrictions, and how can we reasonably fight back, and what are our legal rights?
Well, your legal rights are the same that they've always been. So if a governor is going to put out an executive order that's not founded in the Constitution or the law, it has no effect, right? The problem is you got to get in front of a judge and convince a judge that you're right before there's going to be any kind of pronouncement against the governor, which means whoever it is that's going to be your mouthpiece is likely going to end up in the court system. So if you're looking for an option that doesn't require you to go out and hire a lawyer, petition is probably your best bet. Email campaigns, you get your friends and neighbors, you start signing petitions, you send it to every congressional representative above the state and local level, even the federal level, and you let them know what your position is and what you think it is. And some well-written petitions with enough signatures on it, it gets politicians' attention. Start going to the local meetings. Every time they have a town hall, bring it up. And I'm not suggesting you argue or be disruptive, but certainly don't be afraid to stand up and make your point. Just like Shelley did, she stood right up in court and told the judge, "Judge, I hear what you're saying. You're wrong. I disagree with you." And if she did it politely, she did it respectfully. And because she was respectful, she got the lieutenant governor of Texas involved in her case. Now, if she had stood up and she had been just a giant pill to swallow and had been rude and degrading to the judge, I seriously doubt the lieutenant governor would have come down from the Capitol to help her out. If she had been cursing up a storm, throwing expletives, that's not the kind of behavior that gets people on your side.
All right. So very good. Thank you very much for everyone that has attended. We are very grateful for your attendance. If you want to be on the next one, I don't know how many people received the email directly from us or received it from a friend for this Zoomcast. We want to have your emails. If you would like to send your email to
take a second and actually go to the website. There's a form on the website that allows you to submit your email address so I can get a mailing list going. And every time we do one of these, I'll send you the link to the Zoomcast. And the idea is this is going to be like the snowball effect. We're just going to get more and more people coming on every week. I recorded this interaction, so we'll edit it up, maybe throw in some background music or something, some danger music when we start talking. No, I'm just kidding. We're not doing that.
No, you guys will be able to say you were there. You were there for the first one. This was it. This became a great movement the way through August for the primary, and then all the way through November for the victory.
So we'll take this clip, we'll throw it up on the website, we'll put it up on YouTube so people can catch it even if they didn't have an opportunity to log in, so they could feel like they were here and participating. And then we're going to try to do it every week. And by the way, if you have suggestions about topics that you would like to talk about, send those in too, because we can do a whole 30-40 minute set about whatever topic. I got a couple ideas rattling around in my head for the next few, but I'm just one guy. So some public input and what you'd like to hear discussed, and maybe some hot button topics, maybe what you're seeing going on in the media, let us know, and we'll take up the topic and we'll put it out there for people.
All right.
All right, everybody. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much.
Please hit up the website. I'm going to be watching my phone, see how many people start hitting the website. So hope to see you there, and I hope to see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe out there.
Yep, stay safe.